I still remember the moment my breath caught in my throat, the light from the hallway bouncing off the edge of the velvet box, tucked beneath my sister's coat in the hall closet. It was Grandma's sapphire brooch. The one she'd promised would one day be mine. My name is Ava. I'm 31, and I've always known how resentment can grow in the silence of a family home. But I didn't know betrayal could be this quiet, this deliberate. It had been 6 weeks since we buried Grandma. 6 weeks since I stood alone at her bedside, holding her hand as the machines went still. My sister Claire didn't make it to the hospital. She claimed traffic. My mother said she needed rest. I didn't argue. After all, I'd already learned that grief has a way of singling out the steady one. The responsible daughter. The quiet anchor. But I never expected to find Grandma's brooch, the piece she wore at her wedding, the one she once called her legacy in blue, stuffed like an afterthought beneath my sister's coat. Claire hadn't said a word about it. Not during the funeral. Not after the will was read. Not when she hugged me tightly and whispered, "I just want us to stick together, no matter what." No mention of the safe. The missing pieces. The jewelry I'd been told was in trust. I stood frozen in the hallway that night. My fingers numb. The brooch's clasp was bent, like someone had pulled it off in a hurry. Something in me shifted. That was the night I knew this wasn't forgetfulness. It was theft. And the worst part wasn't what Claire had taken, it was what she thought I'd let her get away with. I didn't say anything right away. I drove home. I sat in my apartment, turned the kettle on and off without boiling water, and stared at the photograph of Grandma and me from the garden last spring. She was wearing the brooch. I was wearing her cardigan. She used to call me her second chance. And suddenly, I knew, this story didn't end with that brooch. It was only beginning. What I did next, well, that's the part they never expected. It wasn't just about the brooch. It was about everything it represented, the erosion of promises, the quiet reordering of truth. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, replaying every conversation I'd had with Claire over the past year. Every offhand remark, every too tight smile, every time she'd changed the subject when Grandma's estate came up. The signs were there. I just hadn't wanted to believe them. By morning, the quiet resolve I'd clung to for years had turned into something harder. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It was a heavier feeling. A knowing. Like realizing the cracks in the foundation of your home weren't new, they'd just finally spread far enough for you to trip. That weekend, I drove to the storage unit Grandma had kept on the edge of town. She called it her practical archive, a concrete box filled with ledgers, documents, boxes of photos, and once, an entire 1970s tea set she'd found at an estate sale and couldn't bear to leave behind. I still had a key. Claire had never shown any interest in it. The ledger was still there, exactly where I remembered it, third shelf from the bottom, wrapped in an old cashmere scarf. Inside, her handwriting, neat and deliberate. Itemized records of every heirloom, every appraisal, every change in designation. Next to the brooch, in her script, to be gifted to Ava, upon my passing. Per trust agreement, July 2021. I traced the words with my fingertip. She'd been so meticulous. So intentional. There was no ambiguity here. Below the jewelry list was a second section, personal notes. Short entries, fragments really, but telling. One caught my eye. Claire has asked again about the estate. I worry her interest isn't sentimental. Another one, dated just 2 months before Grandma passed, updated safe location. Shared with Ava only. I closed the ledger and sat in the silence. The concrete walls pressed in around me, but I didn't feel trapped. I felt insulated. Protected. For the first time in weeks, I felt like she was still with me, not in the spiritual sense, but in the deliberate systems she'd left behind. The paper trail of her belief in me. Claire wasn't going to get away with this. Not quietly. Not again. The safe had been emptied. I'd checked the week after the funeral, when I stopped by the house to gather Grandma's letters. The documents were intact, but the velvet-lined trays where she kept her jewelry were barren. Claire claimed she'd moved everything for safekeeping. "Don't worry," she'd said, "I've got it under control." Control. That word again. I started listing what was missing. Not just the brooch. The pearl earrings from Kyoto. The Art Deco ring Grandma wore in every formal photograph for the past 20 years. A gold locket with our initials carved inside, hers and mine. All gone. The trust agreement specified that none of the personal effects could be distributed or sold until the probate process completed. Claire had violated that. And now, I needed to prove it. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. Family betrayal is a specific kind of violence, invisible to the outside world unless you build a case that even love can't deny. I started small. Quiet. Strategic. That Monday, I reached out to Grandma's estate attorney, Ms. Ellison. We'd spoken briefly after the funeral. She'd struck me as no-nonsense, the kind of woman who wore navy in every season and preferred facts to pleasantries. I asked for an appointment. When I arrived at her office, she gave me a long, appraising look as she gestured for me to sit. "I've been expecting you," she said. I didn't flinch. "I believe there's been a violation of the estate's restrictions." Her brow arched. "Go on." I laid it out, not emotionally, but chronologically. The missing pieces, the itemized list from the ledger, the sudden vanishing of heirlooms Claire claimed to have secured. I handed her a scanned copy of Grandma's notes. She said nothing for a while. Just tapped her pen against the edge of her desk. Finally, "You're calm." I nodded. "That tells me you've known this was coming." "I suspected. Now I know." She studied the ledger entries. "This," she said, tapping the note about the safe location, "this changes things." I didn't ask what she meant. I waited. She looked up at me. "Legally, Claire could be in breach of fiduciary duty if she's acting as an informal executor and has sold or transferred property without authorization." "She has," I said quietly. Ms. Ellison nodded slowly. "Then we'll need to move carefully. Discreetly." I left with a folder of preliminary documents and a tight ball of tension in my stomach. Not fear. Something closer to anticipation. Claire had underestimated me. Again. I spent the next week combing through photos. Old Christmases, birthdays, anniversaries. Any image that showed Grandma wearing one of the missing items. I created a catalog. Dates. Locations. Metadata. I knew what I was doing. I was raised to be the quiet one. The thoughtful one. The girl who asked questions instead of making demands. But I was also the granddaughter of a woman who ran her own accounting firm for 37 years. Who never forgot a detail. Who taught me how to keep a ledger before I learned how to drive. That Saturday, I went back to my parents' house. Claire was there, sitting in the sunroom, sipping coffee like she'd earned a vacation. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I asked, "Have you seen the Kyoto pearls?" I wanted to include them in the estate inventory for probate. Her eyes flicked up. Just a second too long. "No idea," she said. "Maybe they were misplaced." "Strange. Grandma logged them last fall." "I had the documentation." She smiled, tight-lipped. "Well, maybe you misplaced them. You've been handling so much lately." The implication hung in the air like fog. That's when I knew, she thought this would unravel me. But she had no idea what was coming. I left soon after, leaving behind the scent of cold mint tea and the silence of a house that used to feel like home. That night, I called Ms. Ellison and said only 3 words. "I'm ready now." She didn't ask for clarification. Just said, "Come Monday." And something in my chest, something I hadn't realized was clenched, finally began to loosen. Because I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. And Claire, for all her games, had forgotten one thing. I wasn't 13 anymore. I wasn't scared of her. Not even a little. There's a particular kind of grief that comes when you realize someone is trying to erase you while you're still alive. It's quiet, suffocating, like being smothered with silk. The week after I told Ms. Ellison I was ready, the pressure started tightening around me like a noose. Not from the outside, not yet. From within. I kept waking up before dawn, breath shallow, sheets tangled, like my body was trying to outrun something my mind hadn't named yet. My apartment, once a sanctuary, felt too still. Even the sound of the kettle clicking off became jarring. Claire hadn't contacted me. She didn't have to. Her silence was a message in itself, smug, controlled, purposeful. And I understood why. She believed I'd flinch first. The following Monday, I met with Ms. Ellison again. We sat in her quiet office as the morning light bled through linen curtains. She handed me a document I'd never wanted to see but had known was inevitable. It was a formal notice of petition. Claire had filed to be named executor of the estate. There was a line item, buried 3 pages in, that outlined her request for reimbursement of protective efforts related to physical property. Jewelry, specifically. The phrasing was careful. Vague. I read it twice, hand steady. Then again, slower. She was trying to legitimize what she'd done. To frame it as stewardship. Ms. Ellison said, "We'll file a counter-petition, and fast." I nodded. I've already started cataloging everything missing. With photos and dates. Her eyes flicked up. You're thorough. I shrugged. It's not personal. It's arithmetic. But it was personal. Deeply. I just didn't have the luxury of showing it. Outside the courthouse, I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes before starting the engine. Something about seeing her handwriting on that petition, elegant, looping, entitled, made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't soothe. Not with logic. Not with tea. Not even with resolve. Because Claire wasn't just trying to steal from the estate. She was rewriting the narrative. Recasting herself as the responsible one, the protector, the grieving granddaughter holding it all together. And I knew exactly how that story would play to outsiders. Especially to our mother. The phone call came that evening. She didn't say hello. She said, "Why are you making this harder than it has to be?" Her voice was clipped, controlled. She didn't sound angry. Just inconvenienced. Like I was a bad habit she thought she'd broken years ago. I replied, "Did you know Claire filed for executor status?" She paused. Too long. Then, "She's trying to help. You've always been too emotional about these things." It wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict. I ended the call quietly. No raised voice. No argument. Just a soft goodnight, and the click of the line going dead. The next morning, I woke to find my inbox flooded with estate-related emails forwarded from Claire's new lawyer. She'd moved quickly. Aggressively. There were drafts of financial disclosures, inventory updates, all riddled with inaccuracies. Doctored appraisals, altered values, glaring omissions. The brooch wasn't listed at all. Neither were the Kyoto pearls. Or the Art Deco ring. But there were new additions, vague claims about undocumented donations Grandma had supposedly made to Claire in her final weeks. The implications were clear. Claire wasn't just hiding the items. She was preparing to claim they'd never existed. I stared at the screen, bile rising. People often think betrayal is loud. Dramatic. But more often, it's a quiet erasure. One item at a time. One life folded into paperwork. One smile at a time in front of others, followed by a knife slid gently into your back. That afternoon, I met with Ms. Ellison again. We started formal discovery. I handed her everything I had, scanned photos, ledger entries, emails between Grandma and me from the past 2 years. All of it timestamped. All of it painfully meticulous. She said, "We'll have to escalate. This won't stay civil." "I don't need it to stay civil," I said. "But I did need it to be quiet. Strategic. Controlled." The emotional fallout had already started. At the grocery store, I saw Mrs. Danton, an old family friend, at the checkout line. She glanced at me once, then looked away without speaking. 2 aisles later, I heard her whispering with someone near the cereal section. Such a shame. I thought Ava was more grounded than this. Grounded. As if I were a misbehaving teenager, not the only person trying to honor Grandma's final wishes. I stopped answering texts from extended family. The tone had shifted. Everything was tinged with judgment. Questions masked as concern. Thinly veiled attempts to extract gossip. Only one person stayed consistent. Lena, my neighbor. A quiet, middle-aged woman with graying hair and a kind of calm presence that made you want to spill your secrets. She knocked on my door one night with a Tupperware of lentil soup and said, "I saw Claire's name in the notice section. Estate filings." I nodded. She didn't ask questions. Just said, "Families are like roots. Some nourish. Some strangle. And then, before leaving, let me know if you need help. With anything." That simple offer, unasked for, unjudging, settled something in me. Because for the first time in weeks, someone believed me without needing proof. The week stretched long. Every day brought a new document. A new falsehood. A new attempt by Claire's legal team to paint her as the benevolent heir, and me as the bitter obstructionist. My mother stopped calling. So did my cousins. Even the woman who used to bring cookies to every family holiday blocked me on social media. Isolation has a taste. Metallic. Dry. It lingers in the mouth no matter how much water you drink. By Friday, I hit my limit. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by documents, photos, notarized records, and let the silence settle. And in that silence, something shifted again. Not rage. Not vengeance. Clarity. Claire thought she was winning because she'd isolated me. What she didn't realize was this. The people who matter may have gone quiet, but the paper trail hadn't. Truth, when handled properly, doesn't shout. It waits. And I was almost ready to let it speak. They thought silence would break me. But silence, I've learned, sharpens the blade. I didn't tell anyone what I was about to do. Not Lena. Not even Ms. Ellison. Some steps have to be taken alone. Not for secrecy, but clarity. That morning, I pulled out Grandma's old ledger again. I'd already catalogued everything once, but this time I approached it differently. Not as an heir, or even a granddaughter, but as an investigator. I traced her handwriting with the care of someone gathering evidence from a crime scene. Because in many ways, that's exactly what this was. Buried in the back of the book, tucked behind a folded napkin stained with old ink, I found it, a typed inventory Grandma had compiled the year before her surgery. With photographs attached. There they were. Every missing item. Each piece documented with date, appraisal value, and a note in the margin. Next to the brooch, reserved for Ava. Not to be handled by Claire. Final. I scanned every page. Created backups. Uploaded them to encrypted cloud storage. Then I printed 3 copies, one for Ms. Ellison, one for the probate judge, and one that I kept sealed in a folder labeled Property Theft, Exhibit A. The next step wasn't glamorous. It involved receipts. Emails. Texts from Grandma referencing heirlooms. I sifted through my digital archives late into the night, assembling a timeline down to the day. Claire's mistake wasn't greed. It was speed. She'd moved too fast, too publicly. She left traces, mentions of appraisers, a dated Instagram photo where she wore Grandma's locket, comments from mutual friends congratulating her on finally getting what she deserved. Screenshots were taken. Metadata was preserved. When I showed it all to Ms. Ellison the next morning, she didn't say anything for a long time. Just kept flipping through the binder with a slow, clinical rhythm. She said, "You could have been a lawyer." I replied, "I just paid attention." Her tone changed. Not warmer, but more direct. "We'll file a formal complaint for breach of fiduciary duty. And we'll request a temporary injunction to halt distribution of any estate property." "Even the items she's already taken?" I asked. "We'll make the argument." I nodded. "I'll testify if needed." She met my eyes. "You're sure?" I was. That weekend, I went back to the house. Claire wasn't there. The lock code hadn't changed. I walked through the hallway, silent as breath, passing the framed photos on the walls. Most were of Claire, dance recitals, award ceremonies, vacations where I was always cropped slightly out of frame. I wasn't looking for memories anymore. I was looking for proof. Upstairs, in the guest bedroom, the one Claire used to claim when she visited, I found the jewelry case tucked behind a box of old Christmas ornaments. It was empty, but the dust outline on the velvet tray told the story clearly. I took photos. Documented the scene. I didn't touch anything. In the back of the closet, I found a receipt from an upscale consignment shop 2 towns over. A handwritten note at the bottom read, "Item accepted, pending sale." It was dated the week after the funeral. I left the house the same way I came in, quietly. Carefully. No confrontation. No theatrics. The consignment shop was open Monday through Saturday. I drove there on Tuesday. Walked in with steady hands and a folder under my arm. The woman behind the counter didn't look up at first. She was polishing a display case. When she did, I said, "I'm here about a jewelry piece that may have been consigned under false pretense." I showed her a photo. The brooch. She paused. Looked at me more carefully. Then said, "That sold last week." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I didn't let it reach my face. "To whom?" "I can't disclose that," she said. "Client confidentiality." I laid the documentation on the counter. Ledger entry. Appraisal note. A copy of the trust clause. And, finally, a scanned image of the original handwritten inventory. She read in silence. The store was empty. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerated case holding vintage watches. Finally, she said, "I'll contact the buyer. Ask if they're willing to return the item. No guarantees." I nodded. "I'll wait." She blinked. "You'll wait?" "Yes." I sat on the shop's small bench, legs crossed, hands folded. I didn't check my phone. I didn't pace. I just waited. After 40 minutes, she returned from the back with a post-it in her hand. "He's agreed to return it. Full refund. He said he'd rather not be involved in legal matters." "When?" "By Friday." I thanked her. She didn't smile. Just looked relieved I wasn't going to raise my voice. On the way home, I stopped by Grandma's favorite bakery. Bought 2 of the lemon tea cakes she used to love. I ate one in the car, alone, and let the sugar melt slowly on my tongue. It was the first real pleasure I'd allowed myself in weeks. At home, I added the return date to my timeline. Noted the refund. Labeled the screenshot folder "Recovered Assets, Phase 1. By Friday, the brooch was back in my possession. Not in triumph. Not with joy. Just relief. It sat in my palm like a memory with weight. I didn't wear it. I didn't photograph it. I placed it gently inside a locked drawer and closed it with a quiet click. Later that evening, Ms. Ellison called. She said, "We've been granted a preliminary hearing." "When?" 3 weeks. I nodded. "Is Claire aware?" "She will be by morning." I sat in the darkness of my living room, watching the city lights blur through the window. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was ready. Because justice, the kind that matters, doesn't roar. It walks in, quiet and undeniable. And Claire was about to hear its footsteps. There's a stillness that comes before confrontation, not fear, but the sense of stepping onto a frozen lake and knowing it will crack either way. The hearing was set for Thursday morning. The courthouse was an hour's drive, but I left at dawn, long before traffic or daylight could catch me. I needed the quiet. The time to sit with myself. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled of wet stone and paper. I walked slowly, heels echoing against concrete, folder tucked under my arm. Ms. Ellison met me at the entrance, her expression unreadable, her pace measured. She didn't ask if I was ready. She didn't need to. Inside, Claire was already seated at the long walnut table, polished, clinical, absurdly beautiful in the sterile light. She wore a pale blue blazer and a flat smile. Her new lawyer, younger, sharply dressed, the type who smiles with his teeth but not his eyes, leaned close and whispered something in her ear. She didn't look at me. I didn't look away. The judge entered quietly, and everyone rose. His voice was calm, efficient. He began by reviewing the petition, Claire's claim to executor status, her list of justifications, her inventory of estate assets. Then he moved to the objections filed by Ms. Ellison. Our documentation. When he invited opening remarks, Claire's lawyer stood. He said, "My client has acted in good faith to preserve and protect the physical assets of the estate. She has maintained possession for safekeeping and intends full compliance with court supervision." He went on about stewardship, family obligations, the complexity of grief. Claire nodded solemnly, hands folded like a penitent student. To someone who didn't know better, she might have looked noble. Then it was our turn. Ms. Ellison rose and spoke with a calm clarity that cut through the room like glass through water. She said, "We submit that the petitioner has not only failed in her fiduciary duty, but knowingly concealed and attempted to sell estate assets prior to probate approval." She listed the dates. The receipts. The brooch. The locket. The inventory. One by one, clean and deliberate. Each point a quiet unraveling of Claire's performance. When it was time for testimony, I took the stand. The courtroom wasn't full, just a few family members seated in the back, my mother among them. Her eyes were unreadable. Her mouth was a tight, colorless line. I spoke without notes. I described the ledger. The handwritten entries. The safe. The missing items. The consignment receipt. The conversation with the shop owner. I answered every question with facts. No embellishment. No emotion. Just clarity. Claire avoided my eyes the entire time. Her lawyer asked questions, too. Tried to imply confusion. Emotional instability. Suggested perhaps I had misremembered conversations with our grandmother, that my interpretation of her intentions may have been colored by grief. I answered plainly. Then he asked, "Isn't it true that your sister was also close with your grandmother?" I replied, "Not in the final years. She didn't visit. She didn't call. I know that because Grandma told me. Often." He paused. "And you documented those conversations?" I looked him in the eye. I didn't need to. I lived them. Silence followed. The kind that prickles under the skin. The judge dismissed me with a nod. Claire was called next. She walked to the stand with that same smooth poise she always wore at school functions and charity brunches. She smiled at the judge. Smiled at her lawyer. Tried to smile at me. Her answers were rehearsed. Polished. She claimed to have secured the items to prevent loss or damage, insisted the consignment attempt was a misunderstanding, a recommendation from a friend that I acted on prematurely. She said she'd meant to disclose it, that she had every intention of including Ava in the decision-making process. It was like watching someone perform a version of themselves they believed in. Her voice didn't break. But her story did. When Ms. Ellison cross-examined her, the inconsistencies began to show. "Why didn't you list the brooch on your inventory submission?" Claire blinked. "It must have been an oversight. Why did the shop list the brooch as delivered by you with no mention of estate context?" I didn't realize it needed to be." "Why is it not photographed in your submission but appears in photos we provided, worn by you during a public event?" There was a long silence. "I wore it once. I didn't realize it would be an issue." Her voice faltered for the first time. "Did you ask the estate attorney before taking possession?" She hesitated. "No." The judge watched quietly, his hands folded beneath his chin. When the testimonies ended, he called a brief recess before issuing a decision. I sat alone at the edge of the bench, hands in my lap, eyes unfocused. I didn't look at Claire. I didn't look at my mother. I closed my eyes and listened to my own breath. It sounded like waiting. The judge returned 20 minutes later. Everyone stood. He didn't preamble. He said, "The petition for executor status is denied. Based on the documentation provided, it is clear that the petitioner acted outside the bounds of her role as informal caretaker of the estate." Claire's jaw tightened. Her lawyer said nothing. The judge continued, "Temporary oversight of the estate will remain with the appointed attorney until a permanent administrator is designated. Furthermore, the court finds sufficient cause to open a civil inquiry into potential mishandling of estate property." My mother gasped. Claire stared straight ahead. The judge adjourned with a final rap of the gavel. It was done. Officially. And yet, nothing about it felt like victory. Outside the courtroom, Claire followed me out into the cold sunlight. I didn't stop walking. She said, "You didn't have to do this." I replied, "You already did." She reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Her voice dropped, low and tight. "You think this is over?" I didn't answer. Because I knew it wasn't. Not yet. Even after justice is handed down, the silence that follows can feel louder than the fight. Like the echo of a slammed door you didn't mean to close. Claire didn't call me after the hearing. She didn't text. But the ripples she left behind were unmistakable. By Monday, I received notice from Ms. Ellison that Claire's attorney had officially withdrawn from representation. No statement. No drama. Just a single sentence: "My client will no longer pursue administrative authority over the estate." It should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt like a sigh at the end of an argument no one truly won. I returned to the storage unit that afternoon, for the first time since all of it. The ledger was still there. The scarf still smelled faintly of dust and lavender. I thumbed through the pages, not looking for anything in particular, just needing to feel her again, not the estate, not the assets, just my grandmother. The one who raised me with quiet dignity and who, in the end, had given me more than jewelry or legal rights. She'd given me clarity. I took the ledger home. Not to protect it, that part was done, but to remind myself that preservation wasn't about things. It was about memory. Intent. The quiet truths we build for ourselves when no one's watching. The house, meanwhile, had gone still. I didn't visit. I didn't need to. A third-party appraiser, hired by Ms. Ellison, was handling the remaining assets. Everything would be properly catalogued, sealed, stored. No one trusted family anymore. Not even on paper. One afternoon, I found a small package wedged beneath my door, no return address. Inside, a familiar envelope, slightly crumpled. My name on the front in Grandma's handwriting. The same cursive that once labeled Tupperware in her fridge or birthday cards slid into the pages of worn books. Inside the envelope was a letter. Brief. Faded. "Ava, if you're reading this, then you already know what I hoped you wouldn't have to learn the hard way. Protect your heart, but don't let it harden. Remember what matters, and who you are. Love, always. Grandma." I didn't cry. Not exactly. But I sat on the floor for a long time, the letter in one hand, my other resting on the hardwood. Just breathing. 2 days later, my mother called. Her voice was strained, but not hostile. Just unfamiliar. She said, "I'd like to talk." I hesitated. Then said, "All right." She came to my apartment on a rainy Wednesday, the kind of gray that made everything feel suspended. She wore a raincoat I didn't recognize and held her purse like a shield. We sat at my kitchen table. No tea. No small talk. She said, "I didn't know it had gone that far." I didn't respond. She said, "I thought she was just trying to help. Claire's always been." Claire. I let the silence stretch. Finally, I said, "She stole. And you defended her." Her eyes dropped. I didn't want to believe it. Not after losing my mother. "You didn't lose her. She left everything in writing." A beat passed. Then another. "I suppose I always assumed you'd forgive her." "I usually do." Her voice lowered. "But not this time." "No." She didn't argue. She didn't apologize either. Just sat there, quietly aging in front of me. When she left, she said, "I hope one day we'll talk about something else again." I replied, "That depends on what you're willing to hear." The next few weeks moved slowly. Probate proceedings continued, but without contest. The estate was divided as intended. The trust held. The assets began transferring. I received a formal certificate of inheritance. I opened a new account and deposited the checks without ceremony. Not everything stayed quiet, though. Word spread. Distant cousins reached out with awkward messages, half congratulations, half inquiries about whether you're still upset. I ignored most of them. Claire disappeared from the town entirely. Moved in with someone, according to a neighbor. Changed her number. No one asked me for details. But every time her name was mentioned, people looked away a second too quickly. Reputation, once lost, doesn't always scream when it falls. Sometimes it just stops entering the room before you do. The jewelry, what was recovered, anyway, was stored in a private safe. I didn't keep it at home. I didn't wear it. I didn't sell it either. Some things aren't meant to be used. They're meant to be remembered. I started volunteering at the community center on weekends. Financial literacy classes. Teaching young women how to open accounts, track expenses, recognize legal terms. It felt like the right way to honor what Grandma had given me. Not the money. The understanding of it. And the ability to protect it. I saw Lena one afternoon while coming home. She was pruning her window box, hand stained with soil. She said, "You look lighter." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." She looked at me. "Some roots get torn out for a reason. So something else can grow." I nodded. And that night, for the first time in months, I slept without waking. No dreams. No breathless starts. Just the clean stillness of a life finally unentangled. But the story wasn't finished. Not yet. Forgiveness doesn't always arrive with a grand gesture. Sometimes, it comes as an absence, of anger, of ache, of needing to explain yourself anymore. Spring came late that year. The trees outside my apartment budded in cautious bursts, like they weren't sure they trusted the warmth yet. I understood that hesitation more than I wanted to. Life hadn't gone back to normal. It had settled into something quieter, a new rhythm that didn't revolve around fear or expectation. The estate finally closed in early April. Ms. Ellison emailed me the final documents, then followed up with a short note, "You handled this with more grace than most. Be proud." I wasn't sure I felt proud. What I felt was clean. Not triumphant, not vindicated, just finished. Like washing your hands after holding something fragile for too long. I returned to the house only once, before it was listed. The real estate agent handed me the keys with a perfunctory smile and waited in her car. Inside, everything felt smaller. The walls had been painted. The furniture removed. But echoes don't need furniture. They linger in corners. I walked room to room slowly, fingertips grazing the doorframes, the window glass, the small scratch in the banister Claire and I used to fight over who caused. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer where Grandma kept her recipe cards. Most were gone, but one remained, for her lemon tea cakes, folded and worn, a smudge of batter still marking the corner. I took it. Not out of sentimentality. Out of instinct. Before I left, I stood at the base of the stairs and listened. Nothing answered. Outside, the for sale sign had already been staked into the ground. Closure doesn't always look like a door being shut. Sometimes it's the moment you stop waiting for someone to walk through it. Back in the city, I started saying yes to more things. A dinner invitation from an old college friend. A weekend hike Lena insisted I join, where we barely spoke, just moved through the woods in companionable silence. I signed up for a 6-week ceramics class. My bowls were lopsided, but something about the weight of wet clay between my palms felt honest. Grounding. It took time, but I started keeping flowers on the kitchen table again. Tiny things. Not arrangements, just a few stems, lavender, eucalyptus, small yellow blooms I never learned the names of. They softened the edges of my mornings. One afternoon, while walking back from the corner bakery, I ran into my mother. I hadn't seen her in months. She looked thinner. More tired. We stood there on the sidewalk, unsure how to start. There was no apology. No explanation. She said, "Your grandmother would have been proud of you." I replied, "She already was." We didn't hug. Just nodded, like two people finally accepting that understanding doesn't always require agreement. After that, she sent a card for my birthday. No message, just her name. It was enough. Claire never reached out again. Her silence wasn't an absence anymore. It was a boundary. One I no longer felt the need to cross. Not out of bitterness. But because peace had become more valuable than reconciliation. People talk about revenge like it's fire, dramatic, destructive. But what I learned is that the most lasting revenge is preservation. Of dignity. Of truth. Of the life you build when no one's watching. I kept the brooch locked away, but sometimes I'd take it out, not to wear, but to hold. Its edges were cool. Its weight familiar. It didn't feel like a trophy. It felt like proof. That quiet doesn't mean weak. That restraint doesn't mean submission. That legacy isn't about what we inherit, but what we refuse to let be stolen, from us, or from those who came before us. One morning, I slipped the recipe card into a new binder, wrote Sophia Ava Morgan across the front in block letters, and tucked it onto my bookshelf. A beginning, not an ending. And as I stood there, sunlight stretching across the wood floor, something in my chest finally settled. It was over. Not because she was sorry. But because I no longer needed her to be.